The Gilded Cage. The champagne flute felt cold against Elena Ashford's fingertips as she stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse. Below, the city glittered like scattered diamonds, oblivious to the quiet earthquake reshaping her world. She took a slow sip, letting the bubbles dissolve on her tongue, her expression as serene as a painted portrait. Marcus would be home late again tonight. The third time this week. Elena caught her reflection in the darkened glass. Silver-threaded auburn hair swept into an effortless chignon, a cashmere dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 42, she still turned heads at charity galas, but lately Marcus barely looked at her at all. Her phone buzzed. A message from Patricia Greenwood, her former college roommate who now sat on Ashford Industries' board of directors. "Darling, saw Marcus at Marconi's tonight." He wasn't alone. "Are you all right?" Elena's thumb hovered over the screen. She typed back, "Perfectly fine. Enjoy your evening." She wasn't surprised. The signs had been accumulating like autumn leaves. Whispered phone calls, unexplained absences, a new cologne that smelled of someone else's choice. What surprised her was how little it hurt. Instead, she felt something sharper, cleaner, clarity. Marcus arrived home near midnight, his tie loosened, reeking of guilt masked in expensive scotch. Elena was reading in the study, Vivaldi playing softly from hidden speakers. "You're still awake?" he said, failing to meet her eyes. "I couldn't sleep." She turned a page without looking up. "There's leftover risotto in the fridge." He lingered in the doorway, perhaps hoping for confrontation, accusations, something to justify what he'd been doing. Elena gave him nothing. Her silence was a locked door, and she could see it unnerved him more than tears ever would. Over the following weeks, Elena maintained her routines with clockwork precision. Morning yoga, afternoon charity committee meetings, evening concerts. She smiled at the right moments, laughed at the appropriate jokes. She was still the perfect Mrs. Ashford, even as her husband's mistress moved into a company-owned apartment in Tribeca. Jade Chen, 31 years old, Stanford MBA, Vice President of Strategic Development. Marcus had introduced them at last year's holiday party, and Elena remembered thinking the young woman had intelligent eyes and an ambitious handshake. Now those eyes were staring out from Marcus's phone screen when he thought Elena wasn't looking. One evening, as Marcus packed for a business trip to San Francisco, Elena stood in their bedroom doorway watching him fold shirts with unusual care. "Marcus," she said softly. He froze. "Don't forget your cufflinks, the platinum ones. They're in the left drawer." He turned, searching her face for hidden meaning. But Elena simply smiled, handed him the cufflinks, and returned to her book. The game had begun, and Marcus Ashford had no idea his wife was already 10 moves ahead. The invisible string Selena's calendar had never been busier. While Marcus jetted between cities with Jade in tow, Elena filled her days with purposeful motion. To any observer, she was simply keeping occupied, a woman distracting herself from an unraveling marriage. But Elena Ashford had never been simply anything. Tuesday morning found her at the Meridian Club, where Manhattan's elite gathered for tennis and discretion. Across a table laden with Earl Grey and scones, she sat with Harrison Webb, the silver-haired investor who'd backed Marcus's first venture 20 years ago. "Elena, it's been too long," Harrison said warmly. "I was just telling Margaret how much we miss seeing you at the symphony board meetings." "I've been thinking about returning," Elena replied, stirring her tea with deliberate grace. "I had to step away when Marcus's company was young. It needed my full attention behind the scenes." She paused, meeting his eyes. "But perhaps it's time I reclaimed some of what I set aside." Harrison studied her with the shrewd gaze that had built his fortune. "The company's doing well, from what I hear." On the surface, Elena set down her spoon. "Tell me, Harrison, do you still hold your original shares?" "Never sold a single one. That 5% has been very good to me." Elena smiled. "I'm glad. Loyalty should always be rewarded." She left the club with exactly what she'd come for. Confirmation that the old guard still remembered who had introduced them to Marcus Ashford at a dinner party in 2010. Who had vouched for his character, who had opened doors with a single phone call. That afternoon, Elena visited the Ashford Industries headquarters for the first time in months. She swept through the lobby in cognac leather and pearls, nodding to security guards who remembered when she used to bring Marcus lunch in the early days. Diane Porter looked up from her desk outside Marcus's office, surprise flickering across her tired face. Diane had been with the company for 12 years, a steady presence who knew every secret, fixed every crisis, and received none of the credit. "Mrs. Ashford, I didn't know you were coming by. It was spontaneous," Elena said warmly. "I wanted to thank you personally for handling the Westbrook merger so beautifully. Marcus mentioned you worked through the weekend." Diane blinked, clearly unused to recognition. "Oh, that was just part of—" "Nonsense. Your attention to detail saved us from a disastrous oversight in the contract language." Elena leaned closer, conspiratorial. "Between us, I don't think Marcus even noticed. But I did. Would you join me for lunch? I insist." Over seared salmon at a quiet bistro, Elena learned what 12 years of invisible labor teaches a woman. She learned that Jade Chen had been restructuring vendor relationships, consolidating contracts under new LLCs. She learned that Marcus had stopped reading financial reports, trusting Jade's summaries instead. She learned that Diane had raised concerns about unusual payment patterns and been told not to worry herself with executive-level decisions. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," Diane said, guilt crossing her features. Elena reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You've given this company everything, Diane. Your loyalty is admirable. But loyalty should flow both ways, shouldn't it?" That evening, Elena sat in her study surrounded by annual reports, shareholder documents, and incorporation papers from 15 years ago. Papers she'd filed herself when Marcus was too busy building prototypes in their garage. Papers that listed Elena Ashford as a founding member with proxy rights to vote shares held by 3 original investors, rights she'd never exercised. Rights Marcus had forgotten existed. She pulled out her phone and composed a message to Patricia Greenwood. "Would you have time for coffee this week? I'd like to discuss some board matters." The reply came within minutes. "For you, darling, always." Thursday at 10? Elena poured herself a glass of wine and returned to the windows overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, in a Tribeca apartment paid for with company funds, Jade Chen was probably celebrating her victory. She had no idea the crown she thought she'd won was made of paper. The perfect storm, the autumn gala, was held at the Plaza, where crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across Manhattan's most powerful. Elena arrived alone, draped in midnight blue silk that whispered against marble floors. She'd received the invitation weeks ago, back when she was still expected to attend as Marcus's wife. She went anyway. Heads turned as she glided through the ballroom. Patricia Greenwood intercepted her with champagne and knowing eyes. "You look absolutely devastating, darling." "I feel rather alive, actually," Elena replied, scanning the room. Marcus stood near the bar with Jade at his side. She wore red, bold, young, triumphant. Her hand rested possessively on his arm as she laughed at something a board member said. Marcus looked simultaneously proud and uncomfortable, like a man who'd bought a sports car and realized too late he couldn't handle the speed. Elena didn't approach. She didn't need to. Instead, she circulated through the room like she owned it, because in many ways she had built it. These people remembered her. The donations she'd secured, the connections she'd forged, the crises she'd quietly resolved while Marcus took the booze. "Elena." Thomas Reichart, Ashford Industries' CFO, appeared at her elbow. His usual jovial expression was strained. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Why wouldn't I be? I'm still technically married to the guest of honor." She sipped her champagne. "Thomas, you look troubled. Is everything all right?" He glanced around, lowering his voice. "Can we speak privately?" They found a quiet alcove overlooking Fifth Avenue. Thomas loosened his bow tie, looking older than his 50 years. "I'm considering resignation." Elena's eyebrows rose. "That seems drastic." "I've been with Marcus for 8 years. I've always had full transparency into the finances." He paused. "Until recently. Jade has been routing contracts through new vendors, companies I've never heard of. When I asked for documentation, she went straight to Marcus. He told me to trust her judgment and focus on my own department." Elena's pulse quickened, but her face remained serene. What kind of companies? Marketing consultants, tech suppliers, logistics coordinators? The invoices look legitimate, but something feels wrong. The amounts are just below the threshold that would trigger automatic board review. He met her eyes. I think someone's skimming, Elena, and if it comes out, I'll be the one held responsible. Have you documented your concerns? Every email, every discrepancy. He pulled out his phone, showing her a folder labeled Vendor Anomalies. But I have no proof of actual fraud. Just intuition. Elena placed a hand on his arm. Thomas, your intuition has saved this company before. Don't resign. Not yet, she paused, calculating. Forward those files to my personal email. I may know someone who can look into it discreetly. Back in the ballroom, Marcus was making his way toward her, Jade trailing behind like a red shadow. Elena braced herself. Elena! His voice was tight. We need to talk. Here. How dramatic. She smiled at Jade. Miss Chen? That's a striking dress. Jade's eyes glittered with barely concealed victory. Thank you, Mrs. Ashford. I wasn't sure you'd be attending tonight. I wouldn't miss it. This charity is very important to me. In fact, I believe I'm still listed as a founding patron. Elena turned back to Marcus. What did you want to discuss, darling? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Not here. Tomorrow. My lawyer will contact yours. About the divorce? Elena said it pleasantly, as if discussing weekend plans. Yes, I've been expecting that conversation. I'll make sure my attorney is available. She watched something like relief cross his face. He'd expected tears, scenes, desperate pleas. He'd prepared himself to be the villain. Her cooperation confused him. I want this to be civilized, he said. Of course. Elena's smile never wavered. We're both adults. I'm sure we can come to an equitable arrangement. She excused herself before he could respond, leaving Marcus and Jade standing in the middle of the ballroom, victorious but somehow unsatisfied. In the taxi home, Elena opened her phone. Thomas's email had arrived, dozens of invoices, payment records, vendor contracts. She forwarded everything to James Morrison, a forensic accountant she'd known since business school. Her message was brief. James, I need you to find the ghost in this machine. Discretion essential. His reply came before she reached her building. For you, Elena? Consider it done. The pieces were falling into place. Now she just needed patience, and Elena Ashford had learned patience in a gilded cage for 15 years. The Reckoning. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning in November. Marcus received the notice with mild annoyance, another administrative formality, probably regarding quarterly projections. He arrived at the 42nd floor conference room at 9 sharp, Jade beside him in a tailored white suit that screamed innocence and ambition in equal measure. The room was already full. 11 board members sat around the mahogany table, their expressions unreadable. Harrison Webb occupied the chairman's seat, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Patricia Greenwood sat to his right, immaculate in charcoal gray. Thomas Reichart was there, too, along with the company's general counsel, Sandra Kim, and 2 people Marcus didn't recognize, a stern woman with a briefcase and a younger man taking notes. What's this about? Marcus asked, his confusion genuine. Harrison, you said routine business? Sit down, Marcus, Harrison said quietly. The door opened behind them. Elena Ashford entered wearing ivory, a power color, a judge's color. She carried a leather portfolio and moved with the calm of someone who owned the very air she breathed. Diane Porter followed, pushing a cart loaded with binders and a laptop. Marcus half rose from his chair. Elena, what are you doing here? I'm a founding member of this company, Marcus. Did you forget? She took a seat directly across from him. I believe I have every right to attend board proceedings, especially ones concerning fiduciary responsibility and corporate malfeasance. Jade's face paled slightly, but she maintained her composure. This is highly irregular. Mrs. Ashford hasn't been involved in company operations in over a decade. Actually, Miss Chen, I never stopped being involved. Elena opened her portfolio with practiced ease. I simply chose to work behind the scenes, but recent events have necessitated a more visible approach. Harrison cleared his throat. Marcus, Jade, This board has been presented with concerning evidence regarding financial irregularities within the company. Evidence that suggests systematic embezzlement through fraudulent vendor accounts. The room went silent. Marcus's face drained of color. That's impossible. Our audits were designed to miss payments below $25,000, Elena interrupted smoothly. Individually, each transaction looked legitimate, but collectively over 18 months, they total approximately $3.7 million. The stern woman with the briefcase spoke up. I'm Rebecca Chan, forensic accountant with Morrison & Associates. Mrs. Ashford retained our services 3 weeks ago. She distributed packets to each board member. These documents detail 53 separate payments made to shell companies, vendors with no actual employees, no physical addresses, just P.O. boxes and wire transfer capabilities. Jade stood abruptly. This is absurd. Those are legitimate contractors for marketing and technology consulting. Really? Elena's voice cut like silk over steel. Then perhaps you can explain why Dataflow Solutions, which received $400,000 for cloud infrastructure optimization, doesn't exist outside of a Delaware LLC filing. Or why Apex Marketing Group paid $200,000 for brand strategy consultation has the same registered agent as your brother's investment company. The color fled entirely from Jade's face. Marcus turned to her, disbelief warring with dawning horror. Jade, tell them this is a misunderstanding. But Jade was staring at Elena with naked hatred. You have no proof I personally benefited from these payments. Actually, Diane Porter spoke up, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. I have the emails. You instructed me to process these invoices under expedited review. You said Marcus had personally approved them and that I should route them through the discretionary fund to avoid bureaucratic delays. She looked at Marcus. I'm sorry, Mr. Ashford. I flagged it as unusual, but you told me to trust Miss Chen's judgment. Sandra Kim, the general counsel, opened her own folder. Marcus, did you review these contracts before signing the authorization forms? Marcus looked sick. Jade provided summaries. I trusted her analysis. You signed 53 authorization forms without reading them, Harrison said, his disappointment palpable. That's not trust, Marcus. That's negligence. Elena watched her husband crumble and felt nothing but a distant sadness. This man had built an empire, then nearly destroyed it chasing youth in a red dress. The board has several decisions to make, Harrison continued. First, regarding Miss Chen's immediate termination and the filing of criminal charges. Second, regarding Marcus's continued fitness to serve as CEO given his failure to exercise basic oversight. Wait, Marcus started. And third, Elena said softly, drawing all eyes to her, regarding the company's future leadership structure. She pulled out a document, sliding it across the table to Harrison. I'm exercising my proxy rights to vote the shares held by Webb Capital, Greenwood Ventures, and the Hartley Trust, a combined 19% of company stock. Rights granted to me in the original incorporation documents that Marcus and I filed together 15 years ago. Marcus stared at her, comprehension finally dawning. You've been planning this? No, darling. Elena's smile was sad and sharp. I've been protecting what we built. You're the one who stopped paying attention. The vote took less than 10 minutes. Jade Chen was terminated immediately, her assets frozen pending investigation. Marcus Ashford was suspended as CEO pending a full operational review. And Diane Porter, who had served faithfully for 12 years, was named interim CEO with Elena as special advisor to the board. As security escorted a shell-shocked Jade from the building, Marcus sat alone at the table, his empire crumbling around him. Elena paused at the door, looking back at the man she'd once loved. I'll have my attorney send the divorce papers by Monday. Don't worry, I'll be fair. Fair! Marcus's laugh was hollow. You destroyed everything. No, Elena said quietly. I saved everything. You just can't see the difference yet. She left him there, surrounded by the ruins of his own making. The true Crown Spring arrived in Manhattan with cherry blossoms and new beginnings. Elena stood in the Ashford Industries boardroom, her boardroom now, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and rose. 6 months had passed since the reckoning, and the company had not just survived, it had transformed. The divorce had been finalized in February. Marcus kept the penthouse and a generous settlement, along with a consulting role that allowed him to save face. Elena had been unexpectedly merciful, understanding that complete destruction served no one. He was humbled but not broken, attending therapy and slowly rebuilding his reputation through quiet competence rather than charisma. Jade Chen had pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud, receiving a 3-year sentence and full restitution orders. The money was being recovered, though it would take time. Elena had watched the sentencing from the gallery, feeling neither triumph nor sympathy, only a distant acknowledgement that some lessons are learned in the hardest classrooms. The door opened behind her. Diane Porter entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a tablet loaded with the day's agenda. She wore a navy suit that projected quiet authority, her hair cut in a sharp bob that had replaced the apologetic ponytail of her assistant days. "Good morning," Diane said, handing Elena a cup. "The board meeting starts in 30 minutes. The Q1 numbers are exceptional, up 17% from last year." "Your leadership," Elena said warmly. "You've exceeded every expectation, Diane." A faint blush colored Diane's cheeks. "I had an excellent teacher, and you cleared the path." It was true. Elena had spent the past 6 months using every connection, every favor, every relationship she'd cultivated over 2 decades. She'd stabilized nervous investors, reassured key clients, and positioned Diane as the steady hand the company needed. Not as Marcus's assistant, not as someone's replacement, but as a leader in her own right. The other board members began arriving. Harrison Webb clapped Elena on the shoulder with grandfatherly affection. Patricia Greenwood kissed her cheek and whispered, "You're glowing, darling. Freedom suits you." Thomas Reichart, now CFO with actual authority to question unusual transactions, gave Elena a grateful nod. Sandra Kim brought contracts for a major new partnership, one Elena had personally negotiated with a European tech consortium. As the meeting progressed, Elena found herself observing rather than dominating. She'd taken the title of board chair, but she wielded it with a light touch, guiding rather than controlling. This was Diane's company to run now. Elena's role was to protect, advise, and open doors, the role she'd always played, but now with recognition and compensation that matched her contribution. "Final item," Harrison announced. "We have a proposal to rename the company. Given recent events and new leadership, the board feels a fresh identity might serve us well." Diane glanced at Elena nervously. They'd discussed this privately, but the decision belonged to the board. "I propose Ashford Porter Industries," Patricia said, honoring both the company's founding and its future. Elena shook her head gently. "The Ashford name carries weight and history. Changing it would confuse the market." She smiled at Diane. "Besides, the name on the door matters less than the names on the contracts and the culture we build. Let's keep Ashford Industries, but let's make it mean something new." The motion passed unanimously. After the meeting, Elena returned to her office, not the grand CEO suite Marcus had occupied, but a smaller space filled with light and art and books. She'd discovered she didn't need the biggest office. She needed the right one. Her phone buzzed. A text from Oliver Chen, a gallery owner she'd been seeing casually for the past month. Nothing serious, just dinner and museums and conversation with someone who knew nothing about corporate warfare. "It was refreshing. Still on for tonight? There's a Rothko exhibit I think you'd love." She smiled and replied, "Absolutely. 8 o'clock?" Elena opened her laptop and began drafting an email to a women's business foundation. She'd been invited to speak at their annual conference about navigating corporate leadership as a woman. 6 months ago, she would have declined, uncomfortable with the spotlight. Now she understood that her story, the patient strategy, the quiet power, the long game, might help other women who felt invisible in their own lives. A knock on her door. Diane peeked in, grinning. "The European deal just finalized. We're celebrating with the team at 6. You're coming, right?" "Wouldn't miss it," Elena said. As Diane left, Elena turned back to the windows. The city stretched before her, full of possibility and promise. She'd spent 15 years as Mrs. Marcus Ashford, playing a supporting role in someone else's story. She'd been good at it, perhaps too good. She'd made herself so comfortable in the gilded cage that she'd almost forgotten she held the key all along. The other woman had claimed the throne, thinking that was the victory. But Elena had learned something more valuable. Real power doesn't announce itself with red dresses and bold moves. Real power is patient. It builds relationships. It remembers favors. It knows that the hand guiding from the shadows often controls more than the figure standing in the spotlight. She'd never wanted to rule an empire. She'd only wanted to be seen, valued, and free to choose her own path. Now, finally, she was. Elena Ashford closed her laptop and gathered her things. She had an art exhibit to attend, a life to build, and a future that belonged entirely to her. The game was over, and she had won it on her own terms, not by taking everything, but by reclaiming herself. The end.